Hello, my name is Jake Allen. I am here on the nightly evening overtime MMA broadcast news for this evening. How are you, Mr. What is your name, sir?
I'm Mr. Diaz.
You actually want to give your last name on this shit?
Yeah.
I could have been saying it the whole time.
Nobody knows my name.
It's either Mr. Diaz or it's Brett, but it's neither at the same time.
Correct.
Okay. Now we got that. Hey, fuck, man. So much stuff has happened. It feels like we're in a new generation, a generation wherein all 50 U.S. states don't find MMA illegal when sanctioned and operating through the right athletic commission. This is big news. This is finally. I'm excited because this broadcast is probably the last time I'm going to have to belabor this point so much. Obviously, leading up to whatever fight card is going to be a big deal. But as of now, this episode is the last time I'm going to have to analyze the bullshit with the culinary union that some people just never, even though much to one of the gentleman's points on the UFC conference call, only two parties were ever allowed to lobby on this subject. The UFC and the culinary union. The only two that had ever submitted and filed the right to lobby on this topic, and you didn't know about them. You're an asshole. You're a lying asshole.
I don't know who the culinary union is.
It's a lie. Yeah. So the whole thing has been very mysterious, and I think that the way that the culinary union operated for the longest time was, it's going to sound like a conspiracy theory, so nobody's going to actually say it because it's too stupid an idea that mixed martial arts that has nothing to do with us, we're going to hold up in a different state than the state that we need the union in.
Well, I don't know if I would say that has nothing to do with us, although the larger issue, as I'm sure you're aware, stems from their problem with Lorenzo Fertitta's and the Fertitta family's casinos.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's really about. And so I don't know that I would say it has nothing to do with it, because really it's anybody that works in a labor situation they can represent, especially like in a service, so on and so forth.
Here's the thing. If they want to be in a union, they work for a company that allows unions. I'm not sympathetic.
I don't really want to go there. I don't know whether or not they have no reason to have gone against it. What I do know is they seem really fucking petty all the time and would just lob the most incredibly egregious bullshit the UFC's way. And I'm not the biggest fan of the UFC. I'm not over here going like, oh, they never did anything wrong. In fact, I attack them regularly.
Yeah, on this show.
Yeah, but at the same time, you look at the culinary union and they're like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? What are you doing?
Yeah.
But I think that's also the name of the game of politics. Who's got the money, and then who's going to get the time to be represented on the floor? Because it's not a typical, law proceeding or something like that where you can say, well, we're going to call all these people and we're all going to talk about it. It's who's going to come up, who's going to grease the wheels, who is contributing to my campaign, so on and so forth, bunch of other dumb shit.
Well, that's why it passed through the Senate every time. It wouldn't even get addressed. The first time it actually gets addressed, boom, it passes by a landslide of 115 to 23, I think.
I think it was 113 to 25. Either way, a fucking lot to nothing.
Yeah. And the people who were making the nothing arguments, it was pretty pathetic, the kind of arguments that we were hearing. My favorite one, in just absurdity, was Richard Gottfried. Good God. I would rather listen to Gilbert Gottfried's screeching absurd sexual things about my mother than listen to Richard Gottfried ever speak again, because he's a fucking... You can't go up there and say, oh, well, all of my esteemed colleagues on my side of the argument, they made the best arguments. It was beautifully worded. I can't do it any better. If you can't do it any better than you sitting up there and pandering to your little friends better, you're not validating, you're not vulcanizing, you're not vindicating, you're just standing up there like a fucking idiot because you don't have anything of yourselves to say. You're just saying what they already said and adding a very little bit of insight at all. Have you ever fucking trained, you idiot?
Well, and we talked about this earlier, and I always think it's interesting, having been a professor and taught writing and so on. What you should always do at the end of whatever you're going to say when you're writing a paper, developing a position, is attack yourself at least a little bit. And so, as we were talking about earlier, I think it would have been much more effective. Not that it would have changed anything ultimately, but would have at least looked better to say, now, I know that my colleagues have said such and such, but there is a problem with this. Such and such is maybe a thing where they have missed, or a thing that we should be thinking about is this, not just, We're so fucking pretty. Could you imagine if we weren't so pretty? We're so fucking pretty. Yeah. I have nothing to say because we are just too damn pretty.
Well, like the one lady who's sitting up there talking about, I think her name was Weinstein. She's talking about domestic violence. Okay, sure. Because some people do bad things, we should just subscribe to everybody and they should just never be allowed to do it. Which is why we're all going to walk to work tomorrow because somebody might drive to work drunk and kill someone. Thanks, bitch. No, you can't prescribe people for making a living and doing what they love to do because of your tenuous argument at that. You're taking something that is a pandering stance. Nobody is pro domestic violence. Even people who have committed domestic violence aren't pro. Otherwise, they would wave a flag saying it. They're not. So you're taking some bullshit stance that's unilaterally acceptable, like saying rape is a bad thing, and then you're masquerading it in front of something that you're trying to use your political agenda for. Get fucked. That was some of the worst argument I've ever heard in my life. You should be ashamed of how poorly phrased that was. And the fact that not only you set the tone, that everybody else just started following along in suit and be like, oh, they're domestic abusers. Yeah, you know what? Show me the statistics because my boy Brett here is going to tell you about the NBA.
The fact that I don't have any nice fun statistics for you right now, but the fact is that when it comes to the NBA, the actual amount of offenses for domestic violence, drug offenses, all of these horrible things that we're all willing to come out and say, oh, that's wrong, it's wrong, period. The NBA actually has the worst statistics for it. The NFL doesn't even come close, and MMA, for one reason or another, isn't even on the map. It's not even comparable at all. Well, we might have our allegations occasionally, but that's it. And so for her to come out and say something like, oh, so domestic violence is bad, they do this thing, and then to say, so we shouldn't allow it, like, well, then you're going to have to get rid of the NBA, you're going to have to get rid of the NFL. God forbid a boxer ever sets foot in Madison Square Gardens because they are fucking just going to rape everybody. You know, it made no sense. It was one of those times when someone that's speaking utilizes their authority and their holding of the floor to say, here's something, and since you can't go for right now, it's true.
Yeah. And there was actually one point at the very end where a lady was like, oh, I just wanted to say what article I had. Well, you know what, lady? We already heard what article you had. It has been cited because it was the only study that you had the whole time. Was not impressive, and we had a rebuttal. As the MMA community, there was a rebuttal because this is not the most dangerous sport. Think about this. In order to practice football, you have to run headlong into somebody who's just your size, if not most of the time bigger than you are. That's practice. Practice is full speed, full contact by comparison to MMA, where sparring can be in some gyms once a month, you know, and frequently when guys are fighting for a camp once per week. We're not talking about every single day. The only way you can train is to do that. That's one of the things I talk about when it comes to jiu-jitsu. When you're doing jiu-jitsu, to learn a technique is pretty much as close as you can compare NFL. Because in order to do it, you have to be doing it arguably hard. You have to be practicing that thing. You can't be doing like what you would do on a heavy bag, where I'm hitting something that's not hitting me. I have no consequences. It's not that way. But even then, show me the statistics on Brazilian jiu-jitsu injuries compared to NFL, and especially not comparable,
and especially long term. I mean, think about one thing where we have a similar problem is in concussive disorder, right? So long-term brain damage, right? Well, one thing that you won't get as much as you will in the NFL is neck injuries. You know what happens sometimes when you have neck injuries where your vertebrae start to separate like this. What it does is it cuts off your spinal fluid. You know what happens when that happens? No. Your brain doesn't clean itself, and the amyloid proteins start to build up. You basically get plaque on your brain. You know what that leads to?
Dumbness.
Dementia, otherwise known as pugilistic fighters dementia. Same thing. So if we're just going to talk purely about what damage can be caused to a fighter in these different scenarios, at the very least, at the very most basic situation, you have MMA, which can be exposed to this kind of long-term, very severe damage, and that's met by the NFL, and then is also increased because of neck injuries, which are far more prominent. So you have it's like an exponential effect. If you're going to say to me that MMA is dangerous, it can cause all this damage to someone, while just completely ignoring both similarities and further evidence of other injuries from other sports. Why? Because they're just part of the American social culture. They're part of the fabric of our culture.
Yeah, and the lady made one, I don't know if it was Glick or whoever, but somebody made a point about joint injuries. Lady, let me tell you, because MMA is so widely regulated that you can't get a cortisone injection in your fucking foot and go back out on the field. It doesn't work that way. So you making your joint argument is stupid because have you ever been to a CrossFit gym? I don't think I've ever had a friend who did CrossFit for a period of more than 6 months who didn't have some kind of a joint complaint, and that is a one-on none. It is you operating in your own sphere with no influence from another human being, and people can still get injured. So that whole argument was just stupid too. The last point I want to talk about as far as pinpointing people and their stupid arguments was Deborah J. Glick. You, ma'am, are an idiot, as evidenced by the fact that you replied to somebody's tweet, Coach Edmund Taverdian, who we're not necessarily fans of, but we're totally on his side right now. You were mocking him and his intelligence. You said, "Nigh genius," instead of "by." So you're stupid, and I hate you. And you made stupid, uninformed arguments that made me embarrassed to be a legal professional in this country, because you cannot honestly tell me that you sat there and researched this point and had a well, concise, thought-out speech. You told people that this was bare knuckle. Hey, moron, it hasn't been bare knuckle in over a decade. So you either had to be an ostrich, burying your head in the sand, which was the money from the culinary union or something, which you claimed didn't exist, or you just have to be a complete idiot. It's one of the two. It's either conscious ignorance or ignorance. And in this situation, that ignorance of 10 years, how are you allowed to have a Twitter, bro?
Well, this is one of those situations where, like, you know it's bad when these are the arguments. You know that even they know that there's nothing else, and they just have to effect some response to justify their representing people that don't even exist.
Yeah, and then there was the one gal who spoke towards the end, and she was like, "Look, I'm just voting no because I don't agree with it because of the domestic violence. I don't expect to change anything, but it's my right to vote no." I understand that stance because you're effectively pandering to your lowest common denominator.
You've been pandered to.
Yeah, and you're just trying to maintain your votership. I get that. But she was much less accurate, and I took a lot